Hey guys, tonight we're going to dive into a place where the air itself was heavy with despair, a place where the sun seemed to rise not to warm, but to merely illuminate another day of suffering. Imagine, if you will, the sudden, jarring knock on your door in the dead of night. You're jolted awake, heart hammering against your ribs, and before you can even properly register the chill in the air, figures in long coats are in your small, humble apartment. Their faces are unreadable, their voices low, guttural commands that slice through the stillness. Your breath hitches. 1 minute, you're dreaming of a warm bowl of kasha for breakfast. The next, you're being roughly pushed into a dark, unforgiving vehicle, the familiar sounds of your neighborhood fading into an ominous silence behind you. This isn't a dream, friend. This is the Soviet Union, and you, my dear listener, have just been arrested. You're about to embark on a journey from which very few returned whole, if they returned at all. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? What's your local time? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the back of a black Raven, the infamous NKVD van, or perhaps even a more unassuming vehicle if they were trying to maintain some semblance of discretion. The windows are either blacked out or too small and high to offer any view of the outside world. Your hands are probably bound, or at the very least, you've been told not to move them. The air inside is stale, thick with the scent of fear, and a strange, metallic tang you can't quite place. You try to recall what you might have said, what whispered joke or overheard conversation could have landed you here. Was it that offhand comment about the quality of bread? Or perhaps the fact that your cousin once knew someone who was deemed an enemy of the people? In this era, under Stalin's iron grip, the reasons were often opaque, nonsensical, or entirely fabricated. This initial shock is a crucial part of the process, a deliberate disorienting tactic designed to break you down from the very first moment. You're not given time to gather your thoughts, to prepare, to say goodbye. One moment, you are a person with a life, with routines and aspirations, however modest. The next, you are a non-person, a number, a suspected counter-revolutionary, an undesirable element in the grand, terrifying machine of the Soviet state. Historians still argue whether the sheer scale of arrest was primarily driven by a top-down directive for quotas, or if it was fueled by a more organic, widespread paranoia and a culture of denunciation that seeped into every corner of society. It's fascinating, in a morbid sort of way, to consider how quickly a society can turn on itself, isn't it? Like that time my cat, Mittens, decided my favorite houseplant was actually an enemy of the state and proceeded to systematically dismantle it, leaf by leaf. Utterly irrational, but with a terrifying efficiency. You might be held in a local NKVD facility first, a temporary holding cell often indistinguishable from a dungeon. The walls might be damp, the air heavy with the unwashed scent of previous occupants and the faint, lingering smell of disinfectant trying and failing to mask something far more sinister. There's no clock, no calendar, just an oppressive timelessness that eats at your sanity. You'll quickly learn that basic human needs, like sleep or a trip to the latrine, are now entirely at the whim of your captors. One mainstream historical fact you'll encounter immediately is the sheer arbitrariness of the arrests. People were taken for the flimsiest of reasons, or no reason at all, simply to fulfill quotas set by the central government. It was less about actual guilt and more about demonstrating vigilance against perceived threats. It truly was a numbers game. Only the numbers were human lives. This immediate loss of autonomy, this visceral understanding that your very existence is now dictated by forces entirely beyond your control, is the first, chilling lesson of your new reality. You're not in Kansas anymore. Dorothy and Toto certainly isn't here to help you. Now, you've been transported, perhaps to the infamous Lubyanka, headquarters of the NKVD, a building whose very name was whispered with dread. More likely, you're in one of the many regional interrogation centers, a grim, nondescript building tucked away in some forgotten corner of a city. The vehicle eventually halts, and you're roughly pulled out, blinking against the sudden, harsh light of a bare bulb, or perhaps the weak, watery light of dawn through a grimy window. You're pushed down a corridor that smells of stale cigarette smoke, sweat, and something acrid, perhaps fear, perhaps cheap disinfectant, or maybe just the general miasma of human despair. You might catch a glimpse of other figures, slumped against walls, their faces hollow, their eyes empty. They are you, just a little further along the path. You're shoved into a small, windowless room. A single table, 2 chairs. This is your new stage, and the play is a one-act tragedy. Across from you sits the interrogator. He might be burly, with a heavy-lidded gaze that seems to bore into your very soul, or he might be surprisingly slight, his voice a quiet, chilling monotone. Regardless, his power over you is absolute. The goal of this initial interrogation isn't to uncover truth, but to extract a confession, any confession, and to break your will. You are presumed guilty the moment you walk through that door. The specific charges often don't even matter. It's about establishing you as an enemy of the people. The tactics are insidious, designed to chip away at your sanity. Sleep deprivation is a favorite. You might be interrogated for hours on end, then left in a cell with a bright light on, or subjected to constant noise, only to be dragged back for more questioning just as you begin to drift off. Food and water are withheld or given in meager, irregular amounts, keeping you in a constant state of physical discomfort. The questions are repetitive, circling back to the same points, often nonsensical. Confess your counter-revolutionary activities, they demand, even if you've spent your entire life diligently following every party directive. You might be accused of conspiring with foreign powers, of sabotaging production quotas, or simply of having bourgeois tendencies, whatever that even means. It's like trying to argue with a particularly stubborn toddler who's convinced the sky is green, utterly futile and utterly exhausting. Physical violence is certainly on the table, though often it's less about brutal beatings and more about sustained, debilitating torment. Standing for days on end, forced into uncomfortable positions, or subjected to psychological games that twist your perception of reality. They might bring in witnesses, often other broken prisoners forced to lie, who corroborate fabricated stories about your alleged crimes. They might threaten your family, describing in chilling detail what will happen to your wife or children if you don't confess. This is the real torture, the psychological warfare that unravels your very identity. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of torture was explicitly ordered from the highest levels of the NKVD, or if it evolved more organically within the system as interrogators competed to extract confessions and meet their quotas. A quirky tidbit from this era is the sheer volume of confessions that were signed by people who later, if they survived, recanted them, describing how they were forced to confess to absurd crimes, sometimes even signing blank forms. One particularly bizarre example involved a man who confessed to conspiring with the Pope to assassinate Stalin using poisoned communion wafers. It sounds like something out of a bad spy novel, but for those in the interrogation rooms, it was deadly serious. You're trying to recall every interaction, every word you've ever spoken, twisting them in your mind, trying to find some kernel of truth, some tiny thread they could have seized upon. But there is none, or at least, none that justifies this. You are an object, a problem to be solved, a confession to be extracted. Your resistance, at first defiant, slowly begins to crumble under the relentless pressure. You realize that your innocence is irrelevant. The only way out, the only way to make the pain stop, even momentarily, is to give them what they want. You begin to understand that survival here doesn't mean standing firm. It means adapting to a monstrous, illogical logic. Remember that metallic tang in the air? It was the taste of dread, mixed with the faint hope that if you just said the right thing, this nightmare would end. But it won't. Not yet. You've confessed. Or perhaps they simply stopped asking, deeming you sufficiently broken. Now comes the next phase of your forced education in Soviet reality, the journey to the Gulag itself. This isn't a quick jaunt down the road. It's often a long, agonizing transport that can last weeks, even months, covering thousands of kilometers across the vast, unforgiving Soviet Union. You're no longer in a solitary cell, a dubious comfort, but crammed into a Stolypin car, a special type of railway carriage designed for prisoners, or perhaps even a regular freight car, repurposed for human cargo. Imagine a sardine can, but with less luxury and significantly more despair. The wagons are packed beyond capacity, sometimes 40 or 50 people squeezed into a space meant for a fraction of that number. The air quickly becomes thick and fetid, a noxious blend of unwashed bodies, stale breath, and the ever-present stench of excrement from the single, often overflowing, bucket that serves as a latrine. There are no windows, or if there are, they're tiny, barred slits high up, offering only a tantalizing, unreachable glimpse of the passing world. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the train on the tracks becomes the oppressive soundtrack to your slow descent into a new kind of hell. It's a sound that will haunt your nightmares for years, a constant reminder of being hurtled towards an unknown, dreadful fate. Sleep is a luxury. You try to snatch moments of unconsciousness, slumped against a complete stranger, your body aching from the constant vibration and the unyielding floor. The cold can be brutal, especially if you're traveling through the vast, frozen expanses of Siberia. Your meager clothes offer little protection, and the thin air seeps into your bones. But sometimes, just as debilitating, is the heat, trapped and suffocating in the packed carriage, making it difficult to breathe, especially for the elderly or those already weakened by illness. It's a bit like trying to sleep on a roller coaster, except the roller coaster lasts for days, and every dip feels like your last breath. Food is practically non-existent. You might receive a crust of stale bread and a ladle of watery soup once a day, if you're lucky. Water is even scarcer, leading to a constant, burning thirst that parches your throat and makes every swallow an effort. You witness, firsthand, the brutal truth of the survival of the fittest. The weakest, the sickest, those already on the brink, begin to succumb. Their bodies, limp and lifeless, are often left amongst the living until the next stop, when they are unceremoniously tossed off the train. It's a chilling preview of the casual disregard for human life that will become the norm. This journey is a deliberate process of dehumanization, designed to strip you of your last vestiges of dignity, to make you understand that you are no longer a person, but merely cargo, destined for a specific, grim destination. One mainstream historical fact about these transports is that millions of people endured them. From the earliest days of the Gulag system, the logistical challenge of moving such vast numbers of prisoners across the immense Soviet landmass was itself a colossal undertaking, a grim testament to the scale of state-sponsored repression. A quirky tidbit is that sometimes, particularly during early, more disorganized periods, prisoners would pass messages to people on the outside by throwing scraps of paper with their names and destinations out of the train windows, hoping they would be found and their families notified. A desperate, almost cinematic gesture of defiance against the crushing anonymity. Historians still argue whether the extreme conditions of these transports were primarily a deliberate policy of attrition, aimed at weakening prisoners before they even arrived, or a tragic consequence of the Soviet regime's sheer inefficiency and indifference to human life on a grand scale. Either way, for you, crammed in that wagon, every rattling kilometer feels like another nail in your coffin. You clutch your meager belongings, perhaps a photograph, a worn piece of fabric, a tiny, precious link to the life that now seems impossibly distant. You try to remember the faces of your loved ones, their voices, but even those memories feel fragile, threatened by the encroaching darkness. The train finally grinds to a halt. The screech of the brakes is a harsh, unwelcome sound after the relentless rhythm of the tracks. A moment of silence, thick with anticipation, then the sudden, brutal clang of the doors being thrown open. Light, harsh and blinding, floods the wagon, momentarily disorienting you. The air that rushes in is shockingly cold, carrying the biting scent of pine and something else you can't quite place. Perhaps coal smoke, perhaps just the desolation of the vast, empty landscape. You are roughly ordered out, shoved and pushed, stumbling onto a makeshift platform of packed earth or rough-hewn planks. This is it. This is your destination. You are at the Gulag. Before you stretches a landscape dominated by watchtowers, their silhouettes stark against the low, often gray, sky. Barbed wire, many strands thick, gleams ominously, forming an impenetrable barrier. Beyond the wire, you see the outlines of crude wooden barracks, long and low, interspersed with other, equally primitive structures. A mess hall, an infirmary that looks more like a shed, perhaps a solitary confinement cell, its small, dark opening like an eye staring back at you. The ground is often frozen solid, or a muddy, desolate expanse, depending on the season. There are no trees within the compound itself, just a cleared, barren space that emphasizes the stark, unnatural confinement. It's not quite the charming holiday resort you might have imagined. unless your idea of charm involves extreme discomfort and the constant threat of death. As you stand there, shivering, perhaps from the cold, or perhaps from a deeper chill that has settled in your bones, you begin to grasp the scale of this operation. This isn't just a prison. It's an entire system, a vast network of forced labor camps sprawling across the Soviet Union. One mainstream historical fact is that at its peak, the Gulag system encompassed hundreds, if not thousands, of camps, holding millions of prisoners at any given time. It was a massive, geographically dispersed enterprise, designed not just for punishment, but for resource extraction, fueled by human misery. You're now part of a long, shuffling line of new arrivals. The guards, heavily armed and clad in thick, padded coats, bark orders, their voices amplified by the vast, open space. Their faces are grim, impassive, betraying no hint of humanity. They are merely extensions of the system, cogs in the machinery of repression. You observe the other prisoners around you, those who have arrived before you, their faces already etched with the signs of suffering. Gaunt cheeks, sunken eyes, a haunted, distant look. Some wear tattered remnants of their former clothes, while others are already in the patched, threadbare uniforms of the camp. You realize with a jolt that your own clothes, perhaps a coat, a hat, a scarf, are still your last link to your old life. They won't last long here. A quirky tidbit from the initial processing of new arrivals is that prisoners were often forced to strip naked, regardless of the weather, for a sanitary inspection that was more about humiliation and confiscation of valuables than actual hygiene. Imagine standing there, completely vulnerable, in minus 30-degree weather, while a board guard picks through your last remaining possessions. Any personal items, watches, rings, photographs, even extra pieces of clothing, are systematically confiscated. You'll be given a rough, ill-fitting uniform stamped with your prisoner number. This act, the stripping away of your identity and your possessions, is a final, definitive severing of ties with the outside world. You are no longer Ivan or Natasha. You are Prisoner X. It's like checking into a very exclusive, very unpleasant club, only you didn't apply for membership and the amenities are, well, let's just say they're not rated 5 stars on any travel site. Historians still argue whether the physical layout and architecture of the Gulag camps were primarily designed for maximum security and control, or if their crude, temporary nature reflected the regime's ad hoc approach and lack of long-term planning for such a vast system. Regardless, for you, standing there at the gates, the overwhelming feeling is one of complete and utter powerlessness. The cold wind whips around you, carrying the distant clang of tools and the shouts of guards. This is your new home. This is where you will learn, in the most brutal way imaginable, what it means to truly lose everything. The air, once just cold, now tastes of ash and sorrow. The initial shock of arrival slowly gives way to the grinding reality of your first days. You're no longer just a body being processed. You're now a unit within the camp, expected to immediately contribute to its brutal economy. The first thing you notice, beyond the incessant cold, is the omnipresent hunger. The small crust of bread and watery gruel you might have received on the train now seems like a feast compared to the rations here. You quickly learn that your food intake is directly tied to your work output, a deliberate and perverse incentive system designed to push you beyond your limits. You're assigned to a brigade, a work group, and immediately put to labor. There's no acclimatization period, no gentle easing in. You are expected to work, and work hard, from the very first sunrise. For many, especially those who were intellectuals or never engaged in manual labor, the physical demands are a profound shock. Your muscles, accustomed to softer pursuits, scream in protest. Your hands, once perhaps smooth from years of writing or office work, quickly become raw, blistered, and cracked. This immediate physical exertion, coupled with starvation, ensures that your body begins to deteriorate almost immediately. It's like trying to run a marathon after only ever walking to the corner store for milk. Your body simply isn't ready for this level of abuse. The work itself is often meaningless, deliberately designed to be exhausting and soul-destroying. You might be felling trees in the frozen taiga, the sharp axes biting into resistant wood, your fingers numb with cold. Or perhaps you're digging ditches in permafrost, the ground as hard as rock, your shovel scraping uselessly against the unforgiving earth. You could be building railways, dragging heavy sleepers through mud or snow, or working in a mine, deep underground, breathing in dust and darkness. One mainstream historical fact is that much of the infrastructure of the Soviet Union, canals, railways, mines, and entire cities, was built, quite literally, on the bones of Gulag prisoners. The cold is an adversary as constant as the hunger. Winter in these northern and Siberian camps is unimaginable for those who haven't experienced it. Temperatures can plummet to -40 or even -50 degrees Celsius. Your breath freezes in the air, forming tiny ice crystals on your eyelashes. The ground is a solid sheet of ice. Your inadequate clothing, often thin and worn, offers scant protection. Frostbite becomes a common, crippling ailment, leading to the loss of fingers, toes, or even entire limbs. You watch as others succumb, their bodies freezing solid where they fall. A particularly quirky tidbit is that prisoners would sometimes try to make crude, improvised foot coverings out of rags, bark, or even paper to try and protect their feet from the biting cold, often to little avail. It was a testament to human ingenuity in the face of impossible odds, like trying to warm yourself with a birthday candle during an Arctic blast. The psychological toll begins to mount rapidly. The endless, monotonous work, the constant hunger, the gnawing cold, and the ever-present threat of violence from guards or fellow prisoners chip away at your mental fortitude. Sleep, when it comes, is often restless and disturbed by the sounds of the barracks, the coughing of the sick, or the gnawing anxiety of what the next day will bring. You begin to lose track of time, days blurring into weeks, weeks into months. The world outside, the one you knew, starts to feel like a fading dream, replaced by the grim, inescapable reality of the camp. Historians still argue whether the sheer brutality of the initial days in the Gulag was a conscious policy of breaking in new prisoners, or if it was simply a byproduct of the inherent inefficiency and cruelty of the system itself, a system designed to extract labor at any cost, regardless of human life. For you, the answer doesn't matter. All you know is the burning in your lungs, the ache in your muscles, and the hollow emptiness in your stomach. Your hands, which once held pens or perhaps a warm cup of tea, now hold crude tools, their blisters a painful, permanent reminder of your new existence. The initial shock of the first few days quickly transforms into the relentless, grinding monotony of the work regimes. This isn't just physical labor. It's an all-consuming, soul-crushing force designed to extract every last ounce of your strength, leaving nothing but an empty shell. You now understand that the Gulag is a vast industrial complex, powered by human misery, and you are merely a cog in its brutal machinery. Your output, your daily quota, becomes the single most important metric of your existence. Fail to meet it, and your already meager rations are cut, further weakening you, pushing you closer to the brink. Imagine swinging an axe for hours on end in sub-zero temperatures, felling trees so enormous they dwarf you, their trunks thick with ancient rings. Or perhaps you're loading timber onto crude sleds, dragging them through knee-deep snow, your muscles screaming with every step. You could be digging a canal, working with shovels and picks in frozen earth, or perhaps in boggy, mosquito-infested swamps during the brief summer months. Some camps were dedicated to mining, where you descended into dark, claustrophobic shafts, chipping away at rock face, your lungs slowly filling with dust, the constant threat of collapse hanging over your head. The work is not skilled. It is brute force, repetitive, and utterly dehumanizing. It's the kind of work that makes you wonder if Sisyphus ever complained about his boulder, because at least he didn't have frostbite. The pace is relentless. Overseers, often former prisoners themselves who have gained a modicum of power by collaborating, or the ever-present guards, watch your every move. Their whips and shouts are constant companions. There's no room for error, no allowance for weakness. If you falter, if you slow down, you're not just risking a beating, you're risking your life, as reduced rations inevitably lead to starvation and sickness. This creates a perverse camaraderie within the brigades, a desperate reliance on each other to meet the quota. If one person falters, everyone suffers, leading to internal pressures that can be as brutal as the guards themselves. One mainstream historical fact that becomes terrifyingly apparent is how vital this forced labor was to the Soviet economy. The Gulag was not merely a punitive system. It was an economic engine, providing cheap, disposable labor for vast infrastructure projects and resource extraction in remote, inhospitable regions. From the White Sea-Baltic Canal to the vast timber industries of the far north, the Stalinist miracle was built on the backs of millions of prisoners. A particularly quirky tidbit that emerges from survivor accounts is how prisoners, despite the overwhelming conditions, would sometimes find tiny, almost imperceptible ways to subtly sabotage production or slow down work, a small act of rebellion that might go unnoticed but offered a sliver of defiance. It was a bit like trying to stop a charging bull with a feather, but every little bit counted. You learned to conserve every calorie, to move with grim efficiency, to ignore the constant pain in your joints, the burning in your lungs. Your body becomes a machine, driven by the primal urge to survive one more hour, one more shift. Your mind, however, is a different story. It drifts between the overwhelming present and the fading memories of your past. You might find yourself replaying conversations, savoring the taste of a forgotten meal, or tracing the faces of your loved ones in the swirling patterns of snow. Historians still argue whether the extreme, often unproductive, nature of the forced labor was primarily a result of the regime's emphasis on sheer quantity over quality and efficiency, or if it was also a deliberate psychological tactic to crush the human spirit through pointless, exhausting toil. For you, the answer is simple. It is designed to kill you, slowly, and extract whatever value it can from your dying breath. The sun rises and sets, each day a carbon copy of the last, marked only by the escalating ache in your bones and the deepening hollowness in your stomach. When the grueling workday finally ends, if you're lucky enough to have survived it, you face the next challenge, the barracks. These aren't cozy cabins. They are sprawling, unheated, overcrowded wooden shacks designed for maximum occupancy and minimum comfort. You shuffle back, your body screaming for rest, only to be met with a scene that offers little respite. Imagine a single, vast room, dimly lit by a few flickering oil lamps or a single bare bulb, if electricity is even available. The air is thick with the pervasive stench of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, damp clothes, and the lingering, sweet-sour smell of sickness. Hundreds of prisoners are crammed onto crude, multi-tiered bunks, sometimes 3 or even 4 high, offering no privacy whatsoever. You might find yourself sharing a narrow plank of wood with 2 or 3 other men or women, your bodies pressed together for warmth in the biting cold, or simply because there isn't enough space. It's like a particularly grim, involuntary sleepover where everyone smells a bit ripe and the host forgot the blankets. There's no personal space, no quiet corner to retreat to. Every sound, every cough, every whispered conversation, every groan of pain is amplified in the enclosed space. Sleep is a constant battle. The collective noise, the incessant coughing of those afflicted with tuberculosis or other respiratory illnesses, the scratching of lice and bedbugs, and the sheer discomfort of the hard, unyielding surfaces make true rest almost impossible. You snatch moments of unconsciousness, drifting in and out of troubled sleep, always aware of the bodies around you, the cold seeping in through the thin walls, and the ever-present gnawing of hunger in your stomach. Hygiene is practically non-existent. There's often no running water in the barracks, and what little water is available is usually reserved for drinking, not washing. Baths are a rare, highly supervised event, if they happen at all. This lack of hygiene, combined with the extreme overcrowding and malnourishment, creates a breeding ground for disease. Typhus, dysentery, scurvy, and tuberculosis run rampant through the camps, tearing through the weakened population with terrifying speed. You witness the constant, casual deaths, bodies simply carried out in the morning, sometimes replaced by new arrivals by nightfall. It's a stark reminder of your own precarious existence. One mainstream historical fact is that disease, particularly typhus and tuberculosis, was responsible for a significant percentage of Gulag deaths, often far more than direct execution or physical violence. A quirky tidbit from accounts of barracks life is how prisoners would sometimes try to fashion crude chess sets from bits of wood or bone, or carve small figurines, desperate attempts to engage their minds and create something, anything, beautiful or meaningful in the squalor. These small acts of defiant creativity were fleeting moments of escape from the crushing reality. Historians still argue whether the horrific sanitary conditions in the Gulag barracks were primarily a result of the regime's deliberate policy of neglect and dehumanization, or if they were also a consequence of the vast scale of the system and the sheer logistical impossibility of maintaining even basic hygiene for millions of people in remote locations. For you, shivering on your hard bunk, listening to the wheezing cough of the person next to you, the academic debate means nothing. All that matters is the desperate fight for warmth, a moment of unbroken sleep, and the dwindling hope that you won't be the next body carried out with the morning frost. Your dreams, if they come at all, are often of warmth, food, and the unbearable luxury of a clean, solitary bed. The gnawing, hollow ache in your stomach is a constant companion, more faithful than any friend. Food isn't just sustenance here, it's the currency of survival, and you have precious little of it. Your daily ration, the payok, is a meager allowance designed to keep you just barely alive, but rarely thriving. This is the realm of famine, not just hunger, and it dictates every thought, every action, every desperate calculation. Imagine waking up with a stomach that feels like a bottomless pit, a sensation that never truly leaves you. Your ration might consist of a small chunk of dark, coarse bread, often mixed with sawdust or other fillers, and a bowl of thin, watery gruel, perhaps made from a few grains of oats or barley, if you're lucky. Sometimes there's a bit of salted fish, so rancid you have to force yourself to swallow it. This isn't a meal. It's a symbolic gesture, a cruel reminder of what your body desperately craves. You wolf it down, every crumb, every drop, as if it were the most exquisite delicacy. You learn to eat slowly, making each bite last, savoring the momentary fullness that quickly fades. It's like being offered a single drop of water in the desert. It only makes the thirst more agonizing. Your physical appearance changes drastically. Your cheeks become hollow, your eyes sink deeper into their sockets, and your skin takes on a sallow, almost translucent quality. Your body, in its desperate attempt to conserve energy, begins to consume itself. First, your fat reserves disappear, then your muscles waste away, leaving you gaunt and skeletal. Your hair might thin, your teeth loosen. You become acutely aware of the smallest movements, the most minor exertion, because each uses precious calories you don't have. This systematic starvation is a key mechanism of the Gulag's cruelty, weakening you physically and mentally, making resistance almost impossible. One mainstream historical fact is that scurvy, caused by a severe lack of vitamin C, was rampant in the Gulag, especially during the long winters when fresh produce was non-existent. Your gums bleed, your teeth fall out, old wounds reopen, and your joints swell painfully. Desperate prisoners would sometimes try to chew pine needles, which contained some vitamin C, but it was a fleeting, often insufficient, attempt to stave off the agonizing effects. A particularly quirky tidbit is the intense psychological focus on food. Survivors recall dreaming of banquets, vividly remembering the taste and texture of meals from their past lives, and even developing elaborate, imagined recipes in their heads. These food fantasies became a form of mental escape, a cruel torture in themselves. Historians still argue whether the consistent underfeeding of prisoners was primarily a deliberate policy of attrition, aimed at maximizing labor output until death, or if it was also a consequence of the Soviet regime's chronic agricultural problems and the logistical difficulties of supplying vast numbers of prisoners in remote areas. For you, the reason matters little. All you know is the constant, gnawing emptiness, the dull ache in your bones, and the insidious weakness that creeps into your limbs with each passing day. You see the spectral figures around you, mirrors of your own diminishing self, and you wonder how long your body can continue this impossible fight. Every sunrise brings with it the same question. Will today be the day your body finally gives up? As if the hunger, cold, and relentless labor weren't enough, you soon discover that the guards are not merely overseers. They are the embodiment of arbitrary power, their whims dictating life and death within the camp. Their presence is constant, a dark shadow over every waking moment. and their authority is absolute, unquestionable. Imagine a man in a thick, padded uniform, rifle slung over his shoulder, his face impassive, almost bored. He holds your life in his hands, and he knows it. There's no appeal, no recourse, no justice here. The guards, often young, poorly educated, and desensitized by the system, operate with impunity. Their cruelty isn't always overt and brutal. Sometimes it's the casual indifference, the sneer, the refusal of a basic request for water that cuts deeper than any physical blow. They might confiscate a meager piece of bread you've managed to save, or force you to work an extra hour for no reason. It's like being at the mercy of a particularly volatile toddler with a loaded weapon and no parental supervision. Beatings are common, meted out for infractions real or imagined. Not working fast enough, looking at a guard the wrong way, or simply for the guard's entertainment. These aren't just slaps. They are brutal, systematic beatings designed to inflict maximum pain and leave lasting damage, though rarely to kill outright, as a dead prisoner couldn't work. Sometimes, the threat of violence is more potent than the violence itself, keeping you in a constant state of hypervigilance, your nerves frayed, your body tense. Beyond the physical brutality, the psychological torment inflicted by the guards is relentless. They foster a climate of fear and distrust, often pitting prisoners against each other. They might promise extra rations or a lighter workload in exchange for information, creating an environment where even your closest bunkmate could be a potential informer. This constant suspicion further isolates you, making genuine human connection a dangerous luxury. One mainstream historical fact about the Gulag guards, often referred to as zeknashi, our prisoners, by their superiors, is that many were conscripts or young men from impoverished backgrounds, given immense power with little oversight or training. This lack of accountability often led to widespread corruption and abuse. A quirky tidbit is that some prisoners, despite the overwhelming odds, would try to learn the names and routines of the most lenient guards, hoping to somehow avoid their more sadistic counterparts, a desperate form of micro-optimization for survival. It's like trying to find the one friendly shark in an ocean full of hungry ones. Historians still argue whether the extreme cruelty of the Gulag guards was an inherent characteristic of the individuals drawn to such positions, or if it was a direct product of the dehumanizing system itself, which normalized and even rewarded brutality. For you, the answer matters little when a guard's boot is connecting with your ribs or their cold eyes are staring through you. You learn to make yourself invisible, to avoid eye contact, to work silently and tirelessly, hoping to simply blend into the miserable landscape and avoid attracting any unwanted attention. Their presence is a constant, suffocating reminder that you are not free, not even in your thoughts, and that your life hangs by the thinnest of threads, entirely at their mercy. The external threats, the cold, the hunger, the guards, are brutal enough. But within the barracks, within the prisoner population itself, lurks another layer of danger: the criminals and the informers. Navigating this treacherous internal hierarchy is a complex dance, where a wrong step can be as fatal as a guard's bullet. The criminals, often career criminals rather than political prisoners, formed a brutal, privileged caste within the Gulag. They were often given preferential treatment by the guards, sometimes even armed and used as enforcers, a perverse, trusty system. They preyed on the weaker political prisoners, stealing their meager rations, their clothes, or anything of value. They established their own rules, their own codes, which were often far more arbitrary and violent than those of the camp administration. Their tattoos, often elaborate and symbolic, marked their status and their past crimes. You quickly learn to avoid them, to never make eye contact, to never challenge them, no matter how egregious their actions. Confrontation meant a beating, a stabbing, or worse. It's like being trapped in a particularly nasty schoolyard. Only the bullies carry shivs, and the teachers don't care. Then there are the informers, the sexity or staccachi. These were prisoners, often desperate for a slightly better life, a few extra crumbs of bread, or simply to avoid further punishment, who secretly reported on their fellow inmates to the guards. The atmosphere of pervasive distrust they fostered was perhaps even more insidious than the overt violence. Any whispered complaint, any casual joke about the regime, Any expression of doubt or despair could be twisted into a new charge of anti-Soviet agitation and lead to brutal consequences, not just for you, but for your entire brigade. You learn to censor every thought, every word, to keep your true feelings buried deep within. It creates a chilling silence in the barracks, where genuine conversation is replaced by wary, superficial exchanges. One mainstream historical fact is that the Soviet secret police heavily relied on a vast network of informers within the Gulag and throughout society, turning citizen against citizen and prisoner against prisoner. This pervasive system of denunciation was a cornerstone of Stalinist control. A particularly quirky tidbit is that some prisoners developed elaborate coded languages or systems of communication, using subtle gestures, specific phrases, or even the way they ate their rations, to convey messages without being understood by informers or guards. It was a testament to the human desire to connect, even in the most isolated of circumstances. It's like trying to communicate through interpretive dance while being constantly monitored by someone who only understands mime. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of criminal elements and informers in the Gulag was a conscious strategy by the regime to further control and destabilize the prisoner population, or if it was simply an opportunistic adaptation to the realities of managing such a vast and often chaotic system. For you, shivering in the barracks, listening to the muffled whispers, the academic debate is irrelevant. All you know is that trust is a luxury you cannot afford, and that survival depends not just on enduring the physical hardships, but on navigating a treacherous web of human cruelty and betrayal. The air in the barracks isn't just stale, it's thick with suspicion. In a place where your very existence is a punishment, any thought of resistance or defiance might seem futile, even insane. Yet, the human spirit, stubborn thing that it is, sometimes whispers of rebellion. You might briefly consider it a desperate surge of anger or despair, only to be met with the brutal, swift reality of camp justice. Any attempt to resist, no matter how small, is met with disproportionate, often fatal, punishment, further solidifying the camp's absolute control over your body and mind. Imagine, for a moment, the whisper of a plan amongst a few desperate souls, a momentary slowdown in work, a refusal to carry a particularly heavy log, a shared muttered complaint about the guards. Perhaps it's something even more direct, like trying to escape, a wild, almost suicidal dash for the perimeter. For the vast majority, these thoughts remain just that, thoughts, quickly suppressed by the cold logic of survival. Those few who act on them, however, become terrifying object lessons for everyone else. The punishments are varied, but consistently cruel. For minor infractions, you might face a reduction in your already pitiful rations, a fate almost worse than a beating in a place where every calorie counts. You could be forced to work in the most dangerous or arduous sections, or made to stand naked in the freezing cold for hours. For more serious acts of defiance, like attempting to escape or organizing any form of protest, the consequences are far grimmer. You might be sent to a punishment isolator, a small, unheated cell designed for maximum misery, often without food or water for days. The cold in these cells is unimaginable, a biting, relentless chill that seeps into your very bones, leading quickly to frostbite and hypothermia. Some prisoners were put in standing cells, so small they couldn't even sit down, forcing them to remain upright for days. It's like being stuck in a coffin, only it's upright and much, much colder. Physical torture is not uncommon, designed not just to punish but to break you completely. Beatings become more severe, delivered with a chilling efficiency. You might be subjected to mock executions, forced to dig your own grave before being pulled away at the last moment, leaving your mind shattered by the experience. One mainstream historical fact is that summary executions, especially during periods of intensified repression like the Great Terror, were a common method of maintaining order and eliminating perceived threats within the Gulag, often carried out without any pretense of trial or due process. A particularly quirky tidbit is the phenomenon of recidivist escapees. Some prisoners, often hardened criminals or those with an almost pathological need for freedom, would attempt to escape multiple times, even knowing the almost certain fatal consequences. They became legendary figures in the camps, They're desperate acts of defiance, though always ending in recapture or death, offering a flicker of defiant spirit to the despairing masses. Historians still argue whether the extreme brutality of the Gulag's punishments was primarily a reflection of the regime's inherent totalitarian nature, aiming to crush all dissent, or if it was also a pragmatic response to the challenges of controlling vast numbers of desperate people in isolated locations. For you, shivering under the unblinking gaze of the watchtowers, the debate means little. You learn, very quickly, that survival means outward obedience, no matter what fires burn in your heart. Every flicker of defiance is extinguished or buried so deep it might as well not exist. In the grim calculus of the Gulag, death is not an event. It's a constant, pervasive presence, a silent companion that walks alongside every prisoner. You witness it daily, sometimes hourly, and its casual, brutal normality begins to erode your sense of what it means to be alive. The dead and dying are everywhere, a stark testament to the system's efficiency in consuming human lives. Imagine waking up in the morning to find the person on the bunk next to you, who was coughing weakly just hours before, is now utterly still, their eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Or perhaps, during the morning count, a prisoner simply collapses in the line, their emaciated body unable to take another step. There's no ceremony, no mourning. The body is simply dragged away, often piled with others awaiting transport to a common grave, or sometimes just left to the elements. It's a chillingly efficient process, designed to remove the unproductive elements with minimal fuss. It's like a particularly grim garbage collection service, only the waste is human. The causes of death are numerous and interconnected, a lethal cocktail of the camp's conditions. Starvation is the most common killer, slowly, agonizingly weakening the body until it succumbs to any minor illness or exertion. Disease, rampant in the overcrowded, unsanitary barracks, sweeps through the weakened population. Tuberculosis, typhus, dysentery, and pneumonia claim countless lives, particularly among the elderly and those already frail. Exhaustion from the relentless, back-breaking labor pushes bodies beyond their limits, leading to sudden collapses and cardiac arrest. And, of course, there's direct violence, summary executions for minor infractions, beatings that prove fatal, or the brutal, casual violence of the criminal elements within the camp. One mainstream historical fact is that the total number of deaths in the Gulag system is estimated to be in the millions, though precise figures remain a subject of historical debate due to incomplete Soviet records. These numbers represent not just individual tragedies, but a systematic, state-sponsored decimation of its own population. A particularly quirky tidbit that emerges from survivor accounts is the macabre competition for the clothing of the recently deceased. A slightly less tattered coat, a pair of worn boots. These were precious commodities, instantly seized by those still clinging to life. It was a grim reflection of the ultimate pragmatism demanded for survival. It's like a particularly morbid game of musical chairs, where the prize is a slightly less miserable existence. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates in the Gulag were primarily an intended consequence of the system, a form of slow execution for enemies of the people, or if they were largely a byproduct of the inherent inefficiency, mismanagement, and extreme conditions of a system focused solely on maximum labor extraction at any human cost. For you, trudging past a frozen body, your own breath misting in the frigid air, the academic debate holds little comfort. All you know is the constant, cold whisper of your own mortality, the awareness that you are perpetually teetering on the edge, one bad meal, or one missed step away from becoming another anonymous statistic in this vast, human graveyard. Your own reflection in a rare puddle shows a face that is a stark reminder of the ever-present proximity of death. If you were a woman, the horrors of the Gulag took on an even more brutal, insidious dimension. While the basic hardships of cold, hunger, and labor were universal, women faced additional layers of systemic sexual violence, exploitation, and agonizing choices regarding their children. Your struggle for survival was, in many ways, fundamentally different and often more desperate. Imagine being thrust into a mixed camp, or even a women's camp, where the guards and the male criminal prisoners viewed you not as a human being, but as an object for their gratification. Sexual violence was a pervasive and terrifying reality. While direct rape was often not officially condoned, the system's indifference created an environment where it occurred frequently and with impunity. Guards might demand sexual favors in exchange for extra rations, a lighter workload, or simply to avoid a beating. The criminal elements within the camp were often even more predatory, establishing a grim hierarchy where women were distributed or traded like commodities. It was a hellish marketplace where your body was the last thing you possessed, and it too could be taken from you. It's a chilling reminder that even in the depths of human depravity, there's always a lower circle. For many women, the choice was stark: endure the violence, or try to find a de facto husband or protector among the male prisoners, or even some of the more compliant guards. These arrangements, born of desperation, offered a modicum of protection from widespread abuse, but often at the cost of one's dignity and autonomy. The psychological toll of such choices was immense, leaving scars that went far deeper than any physical wounds. Then there was the agony of pregnancy and childbirth. Despite the horrific conditions, women became pregnant in the camps, sometimes as a result of violence, sometimes in a desperate attempt to gain better conditions, as pregnant women and mothers of newborns sometimes received slightly larger rations or temporary relief from the heaviest labor. One mainstream historical fact is that special children's camps, or nurseries, known as Doma Rybyanka, were established within the Gulag system, where children born in the camps or those arriving with their arrested mothers were housed. These facilities, while offering a separation from the immediate camp horrors, were often still places of severe deprivation and high mortality rates for infants. The most agonizing choice for a mother was often whether to try and keep her child with her in the camp or to give them up to one of these state-run orphanages, knowing she might never see them again. The conditions in the Doma Rybyanka were often dire, and many children succumbed to illness and malnutrition. If you chose to keep your child, you faced the impossible task of raising them in the brutal environment of the camp, constantly battling starvation, disease, and the pervasive fear of separation. A particularly quirky tidbit that illustrates the desperate ingenuity of these women is how some mothers would try to hide their pregnancies or infants, using makeshift slings or swaddling clothes, to avoid the separation policies, often to no avail. Historians still argue whether the specific sexual violence and exploitation faced by women in the Gulag was an officially sanctioned policy of the regime, or if it was primarily a pervasive, horrific byproduct of the systemic dehumanization and lack of oversight inherent in the camps. Regardless, for you, a woman in this nightmare, the air tasted not just of fear and despair, but of a constant, insidious vulnerability that touched the very core of your being. You became a warrior, fighting not only for your life, but for your dignity and often for the slim hope of protecting a child in a world determined to crush all innocence. In the face of such relentless and multifaceted oppression, the concept of survival itself transforms into a daily, desperate art form. You don't merely exist, you constantly adapt, making choices that whittle away at your humanity, driven by the primal urge to see another sunrise. These are not noble acts of heroism, but often morally compromising strategies to eke out a meager existence, leaving you barely human. One of the most immediate adaptations is to master the art of scrounging and bartering. Every discarded nail, every scrap of cloth, every stray piece of food becomes a potential lifeline. You might learn to trade your meager bread ration for something else you desperately need, like warmer rags or a small piece of tobacco, which sometimes served as a makeshift currency. Or perhaps you'll find a way to steal a quick, silent snatch of a tool or a potato from a momentarily distracted guard or a vulnerable fellow prisoner, the guilt of fleeting luxury you can't afford. This constant vigilance, this hyper-awareness of every opportunity, reshapes your perception of the world. It's like being in a continuous, high-stakes scavenger hunt, where the prize is not winning, but merely not losing your life. You learn to hide your weaknesses and your pain. Showing vulnerability is an invitation for exploitation, either from guards or the criminal element. You become adept at masking your exhaustion, your hunger, your despair, presenting a blank, unreadable face to the world. You learn to perform just enough work to meet your quota, but not so much that you attract unwanted attention or become an example to be pushed harder. It's a delicate balance, a constant negotiation with the limits of your own body. Another grim strategy is forming alliances, however fleeting. You might find a small group of trusted individuals within your brigade, sharing meager resources, supporting each other during the hardest tasks, or even just offering a silent, knowing glance that acknowledges the shared suffering. These bonds, forged in the crucible of absolute despair, could be incredibly powerful, yet also fragile, constantly threatened by informers, starvation, and death. It's like building a sandcastle against a tidal wave. You know it won't last forever, but for a moment, it offers some protection. One mainstream historical fact is the incredible resilience and resourcefulness displayed by many Gulag prisoners. Despite the system's best efforts to dehumanize and destroy, countless individuals found ways to resist, whether through small acts of sabotage, maintaining their dignity through intellectual pursuits, reciting poetry, sharing scientific knowledge, or simply by surviving against impossible odds. A particularly quirky tidbit is the phenomenon of camp folklore, whispered stories, dark jokes, and songs that prisoners created and shared, often filled with gallows humor and veiled defiance, serving as a vital psychological outlet and a way to maintain some semblance of cultural identity. Historians still argue whether these survival strategies, particularly those involving cooperation and mutual aid, were truly effective in increasing individual chances of survival, or if they merely prolonged the inevitable for a chosen few. For you, clutching a stolen crust of bread or sharing a moment of silent solidarity with a fellow sufferer, these small victories feel like everything. But each compromise, each adaptation, each act of desperation chips away at the person you once were, leaving a hardened, often unrecognizable shell. After months, perhaps years, of this brutal existence, a new, terrifying question begins to emerge: the end. What will it be? Will it be escape, a miraculous, almost impossible dash for freedom? Will it be release, a long-awaited, often arbitrary liberation? Or will it be simply oblivion, another anonymous death in the vast, unmarked graves of the Gulag? True escape was exceedingly rare, bordering on the mythical. The vastness of the Soviet Union, the harsh climate, the lack of food and shelter, and the ever-present network of guards, dogs, and local informers made successful escape almost impossible. Those who tried were usually recaptured, often severely punished, or simply succumbed to the elements. You might hear whispered legends of a few who made it, a fleeting spark of hope in the suffocating darkness, but deep down, you know it's a dream. It's like trying to escape a particularly well-guarded ant farm in the middle of a blizzard. Release was the most hoped for, yet least predictable, outcome. Your sentence might finally be up, though extensions were common for flimsy reasons. Or, perhaps, a stroke of political luck, the death of a high-ranking official, a shift in party policy, or the desperate need for skilled labor elsewhere might lead to a review of your case. Even then, release wasn't freedom in the traditional sense. You might be exiled to a remote settlement, effectively still a prisoner, living under strict surveillance. Or you might return to your former home only to find your family dispersed, your reputation ruined, and a society that viewed you with suspicion and fear, making it almost impossible to truly rebuild your life. The very air outside the camp, once longed for, might now taste alien and bitter. For the overwhelming majority, however, the end was oblivion. Death, whether from starvation, disease, exhaustion, or a guard's bullet, was the most common conclusion to a Gulag sentence. Your body would become another statistic, your name erased from official records, your existence as a human being dissolved into the vast, silent history of the camps. There would be no grave, no marker, no memory beyond the fleeting thoughts of those who knew you and perhaps, if they were lucky, survived to tell a fragmented tale. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this grim reality is that vast swathes of the Gulag's infrastructure, including many burial sites, were deliberately erased or left to decay, making a precise accounting of the dead incredibly challenging, if not impossible. A particularly quirky tidbit that speaks to the psychological impact of this uncertainty is that some prisoners, especially those with long sentences, would calculate their odds of survival down to the minute details, analyzing the seasons, the quality of their rations, even the demeanor of the guards. This morbid accounting became a coping mechanism, a way to exert some intellectual control over an utterly uncontrollable fate. Historians still argue whether the deliberate obscurity surrounding prisoner fates, including the lack of formal death records and the secrecy surrounding burial sites, was primarily a calculated effort by the Soviet regime to conceal the true scale of its crimes, or if it was also a consequence of logistical chaos and a pervasive indifference to individual human lives. For you, the difference is academic. Your own fate hangs in the balance, a terrifying unknown. You have endured, adapted, survived, perhaps losing much of yourself in the process. The hunger might still gnaw, the cold might still linger in your bones, but something else has settled within you, a profound, inescapable understanding of human cruelty and resilience. The sounds of the camp, the shouts, the clanging tools, the incessant coughs, now seem to fade into the background, replaced by a quiet, internal hum. The images of the watchtowers, the barbed wire, the gaunt faces slowly begin to recede, like shadows lengthening at dusk. The biting cold that seeped into your very bones, the gnawing hunger that defined your every waking moment, they too become distant echoes, sensations you recall rather than feel. As the last remnants of the Gulag camp fade from your mind's eye, allow your own bed, your own room, to reassert its warmth and safety. Let the stillness of your space gently envelop you, erasing the harsh sounds of the past. The journey through that dark chapter is now complete. Feel the softness of your pillow, the familiar comfort of your covers. Breathe deeply, slowly, and let any lingering chill of that unimaginable world dissipate with each exhalation. The history has been told, the shadows have been faced. Now, there is only the quiet of the night, and the promise of dreams far kinder than any recounted here.